Picture this: a small, rainy island off the coast of Europe controlling India, Australia, Canada, half of Africa, and a quarter of the entire human population. Not through magic, not through luck. Through a system so brilliant, so ruthless, so perfectly executed that its effects still shape the world economy today. Britain wasn't always powerful in the 1400s. It was a backwater kingdom fighting over scraps while Spain and Portugal divided the world between them. But something changed. Something shifted. And within 300 years, Britain became the wealthiest nation on earth, and London became the center of global finance, where fortunes were made and empires fell with a single signature. So what happened? How did a cold, foggy island become richer than entire continents? Stay with me, because the answer isn't what they taught you in school, and understanding it will change how you see money, power, and history forever. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at Britain, this small island, and wondered how they built such massive wealth? Comment below. I want to know the truth. Because what comes next isn't just history. It's the blueprint for how empires are really built. And if you're ready for answers that most people never get, hit subscribe right now. Let's continue. Queen Elizabeth I signs a charter creating the East India Company. At first, it's just a trading company. Merchants looking to compete with the Portuguese and Dutch for spices, silk, and tea from Asia. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just a company. It had its own army, its own navy, its own territory. Within 100 years, the East India Company controlled more land than the British government itself. Think about that, a private corporation owning entire countries. They didn't just trade with India, they ruled it. They collected taxes. They made laws. They executed people. And every rupee, every bale of cotton, every pound of tea flowed back to Britain, filling the pockets of shareholders in London. Spices weren't just food, they were worth their weight in gold. A single shipload of pepper could make a merchant wealthy for life. But the real genius wasn't just what they traded, it was how they controlled it. The East India Company created monopolies. If you wanted Indian cotton, you bought it from them. If you wanted Chinese tea, you bought it through them. They controlled the supply, set the prices, and crushed any competition. And the British government? They loved it because they taxed every transaction. But here's the dark part nobody talks about. This wealth wasn't just from trade. It was from exploitation. Indian farmers were forced to grow cash crops instead of food. When famines hit, millions died while Britain exported grain. Bengal, one of the richest regions in the world, was stripped bare. The wealth flowed one direction, toward London. And the British elite? They got richer than kings. Mansions, estates, entire neighborhoods in London were built with money from India. The East India Company wasn't just profitable, it was the most profitable corporation in human history, until it collapsed. But by then, Britain had already moved to the next phase. Let's talk about sugar. Today, it's cheap. You can buy a bag for a few dollars. But in the 1600s and 1700s, sugar was luxury. It was addictive. It was profitable. And Britain controlled it. The Caribbean islands, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, became Britain's sugar factories. Massive plantations covering thousands of acres, all producing one thing, sugar for European markets. But here's the question. Who worked those plantations? Not the British. They didn't want to do that backbreaking labor under the Caribbean sun, so they created a system. A horrifying industrial-scale system that would generate unimaginable wealth, the transatlantic slave trade. Ships left Britain loaded with manufactured goods, guns, cloth, alcohol. They sailed to West Africa, traded those goods for human beings, then transported millions of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic in conditions so brutal that many didn't survive the journey. Those who did were sold in the Caribbean and forced to work sugar plantations. The sugar was then shipped back to Britain, refined, sold across Europe, and the cycle repeated. This is called the triangular trade. and it made Britain insanely wealthy. Liverpool, Bristol, Glasgow. These cities exploded in wealth from the slave trade. The merchants, bankers, and ship owners became aristocracy. Many of the grand buildings you see in London today, built with slave trade money. The wealth wasn't hidden, it was celebrated. Statues, monuments, entire institutions funded by human suffering. And here's the part that connects to today. Many of Britain's biggest banks, insurance companies, and financial institutions were founded during this period. Lloyd's of London? Started by insuring slave ships. Barclays Bank? Founded by families involved in the slave trade? This wasn't a side business. This was the foundation of Britain's financial empire. And when slavery was finally abolished in 1833, the British government didn't compensate the enslaved people. They compensated the slave owners with taxpayer money, a debt so large that British taxpayers were still paying it off until 2015. Let that sink in. The victims got nothing. The profiteers got paid for centuries. If this is making you rethink everything you thought you knew about British wealth, drop a comment. Follow the money. Because we're not done. The Industrial Revolution is coming, and it's built on everything we just talked about. Subscribe if you want to see how it all connects. 1760s. Britain is already rich from trade and slavery. But now something revolutionary happens. The Industrial Revolution. Steam engines, factories, railroads, mass production. Britain becomes the world's first industrial superpower. But here's what they don't tell you. The Industrial Revolution didn't happen in isolation. It was powered by colonial wealth. Where did the cotton for textile factories come from? India? Egypt? The American South? Where did the markets for finished goods go? The colonies. Britain controlled both ends, raw materials flowing in, finished products flowing out, and everyone else had to buy from them. British factories could produce cloth cheaper and faster than anyone else. Indian weavers, who had been the best in the world for centuries, were put out of business. Their industry was destroyed by design. Because Britain didn't just want to trade, they wanted monopoly. Coal became king. Britain sat on massive coal reserves, and coal powered everything: steam engines, trains, ships, factories. Suddenly, Britain could move goods faster, produce more, and sell cheaper than any competitor. Iron and steel followed. British engineers built bridges, railroads, and ships that connected the world. And every project was financed by British banks, built with British materials, and controlled by British companies. By the 1800s, Britain was the workshop of the world. Made in Britain wasn't just a label, it was a mark of power. If you wanted modern technology, you bought British. If you wanted financing, you went to London. If you wanted military protection, you negotiated with the British Empire. And all of this was protected by the Royal Navy, the most powerful military force on earth. No one could challenge British dominance because Britain controlled the seas. They could blockade ports, destroy competitors, and protect their trade routes. The wealth was staggering. Britain's GDP per capita was higher than anywhere else on earth. The middle class exploded. Even working-class Britons had access to goods that were unimaginable a generation earlier. But again, this wealth came from somewhere. It came from India's deindustrialization, from African resources, from Chinese silver, from colonial exploitation on a scale the world had never seen. They could blockade ports, destroy competitors, and protect their trade routes. The wealth was staggering. Britain's GDP per capita was higher than anywhere else on earth. The middle class exploded. Even working-class Britons had access to goods that were unimaginable a generation earlier. But again, this wealth came from somewhere. It came from India's deindustrialization, from African resources, from Chinese silver, from colonial exploitation on a scale the world had never seen. Now we get to the real secret. The thing that made Britain not just rich, but powerful in a way that lasts forever. Finance. 1694. The Bank of England is founded. This isn't just a bank. It's the first modern central bank, and it changes everything. Suddenly, Britain can raise money for wars, projects, and expansion by issuing bonds and currency backed by the government. Other countries fought wars by taxing their people into poverty. Britain fought wars by borrowing money, then using the profits from empire to pay it back. Genius. And investors? They made fortunes. The British pound became the global reserve currency. If you wanted to do international trade, you did it in pounds. If you needed a loan, you went to London. If you wanted to invest, you bought British bonds. London became the financial capital of the world, and it's still one of the top financial centers today. But here's the dark brilliance. Britain didn't just control money, they controlled debt. Countries that borrowed from Britain became dependent. If they couldn't pay, Britain took control of their ports, resources, or entire governments. This is economic imperialism. You don't need to invade a country if you own its debt. And Britain perfected this system. By the 1900s, even as the British Empire began to shrink, Britain's financial power didn't. Because money doesn't need territory, it just needs control. Today, the City of London, that tiny 1 square mile area in the heart of London, handles trillions in global finance. Hedge funds, investment banks, tax havens. It's still the beating heart of global capital. And the wealth? Still there, still growing, still built on the same systems established centuries ago. If this video changed how you see Britain, wealth, and history, do 2 things. First, comment below. The system is still running. Because it is. Second, share this video. Most people never learn this. They think Britain got rich through hard work and innovation. That's part of it. But the real story? It's exploitation, monopoly, and financial control on a scale most can't imagine. Subscribe for more uncomfortable truths that rewrite what you thought you knew. Let's keep digging. Britain's empire is gone. The colonies are independent. But the wealth? Still there. The financial systems? Still in place. The power structures? Still operating. Britain remains one of the wealthiest nations on earth, not because of what it produces today, but because of what it accumulated over centuries. The Crown estates, offshore accounts, global investments. The systems built during empire haven't disappeared, they evolved. And the world still operates on rules written when Britain was at its peak. So when you see London's skyline, those grand estates, that financial power, remember, it wasn't built in a day. It was built over centuries, with trade, slavery, colonization, and financial manipulation. Britain's wealth is real, but so is its history, and that history still shapes the world you live in today.